He boarded the plane a powerful man and walked off running from his own truth. A child's glance was all it took to turn his life upside down and reveal a secret that would change everything that Christmas. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post new content every day. Now back to the story. Delta Flight 3847 took off from New York at 5:40 p.m., carrying the typical exhaustion of Christmas Eve. Amidst the cramped seats and the controlled hum of passengers, Sarah Johnson adjusted the backpack in the overhead bin for the third time, trying to balance the anxiety of traveling alone with two small children and the anticipation of seeing her grandmother after almost a year. Her twins, Lucas and Theo, 2.5 years old, were squeezed in next to her with the natural curiosity of their age. Lucas, the quieter one, observed everything with big, attentive eyes, while Theo was already trying to lean over the window, fascinated by the lights spreading out below like a glittering carpet. Sarah smiled wearily, running a hand through her brown hair, which was pulled back in a simple ponytail. At 28, her face bore the signs of someone who had grown up too fast. The subtle lines around her green eyes, her constantly alert posture, the air of someone who had learned to handle everything on her own. "Mommy, when are we going to get to Great-Grandma's house?" Theo asked, tugging on the hem of her shirt. "In a couple of hours, sweetie. Just be patient, and soon we'll be there eating her chocolate cake." Sarah double-checked that their seatbelts were fastened and took a deep breath. The trip to Miami was a gift to herself and the boys, 3 days at her grandma, Eleanor's house, away from the suffocating routine of shifts at Bellevue Hospital, away from the bills that always seemed bigger than her paycheck, away from the loneliness that insisted on squeezing her chest in the quietest moments. She had been a nurse for 6 years, ever since graduating from a private college she'd paid for with sheer effort and many sleepless nights of studying. After the twins were born, life became a constant marathon of 12-hour shifts, childcare, and a steely determination not to need anyone, especially not him. The thought of Michael Davis still caught her off guard sometimes, like an unexpected pang of pain. She had learned to push him into the darkest corners of her memory, along with the promises he made and never kept, the calls that grew less frequent until they stopped completely, and the last conversation where he said he needed to focus on his career before committing to anything serious, as if she were just anything. Sarah shook her head, pushing the memories away. It was pointless to revisit that pain. She had learned that the only love she could truly count on was right there beside her, messing up her hair and fighting over who got the window seat. A few rows ahead, Michael Davis adjusted his Armani tie and checked his phone for the 10th time in 10 minutes. At 32, he was the perfect stereotype of a successful businessman. Impeccable suit, expensive watch, confident posture, and that air of always being one step ahead of any situation. As the founder and CEO of Davis & Associates, one of the country's top business consulting firms, Michael had built an empire based on rational decisions, strategic planning, and zero tolerance for sentimentality. The trip to Miami was just another item on his agenda, a meeting with Florida-based investors interested in expanding their businesses in the region. Not even the fact that it was Christmas Eve could slow him down. Holidays were just dates on a calendar, opportunities to work with fewer interruptions. He had always known that success would come at a price. At 26, while building his company, he made one of the hardest decisions of his life, ending his relationship with Sarah to dedicate himself completely to his business. At the time, it seemed like the logical choice. She was in college. He was diving headfirst into the corporate world. Love could wait. Opportunities couldn't. 6 years later, with an 8-figure fortune and national recognition, Michael sometimes wondered if he had made the right choice, especially on nights like this, when the emptiness of his duplex apartment in Tribeca seemed to echo louder than usual. But he quickly dismissed those thoughts. Sentimentality was a luxury that men like him couldn't afford. The plane hit some light turbulence, and Michael put his phone away, deciding to try and relax for the rest of the flight. He stood up to stretch his legs and walked to the back of the aircraft, as he always did on long flights. That's when it happened. Sarah was coming back from the restroom carrying Theo in her arms because he had spilled juice on his clothes and needed a new shirt. She was walking slowly down the narrow aisle, careful not to bump into other passengers, when she looked up and saw him. Time stopped. It literally stopped, as if the world had decided to take a cruel, long pause so they could fully recognize each other. Michael froze in the middle of the aisle, his expression shifting from corporate neutrality to something she couldn't decipher. Surprise, maybe, or shock. Sarah felt her heart pound in a way it hadn't in years. There he was, more mature, more elegant, with a touch of grey at his temples that only accentuated the handsome features that had always disarmed her. His eyes were the same, that intense brown that seemed to see right through everything. "Sarah?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he were testing if she was real. "Michael." She managed to say his name, but her voice came out different, more fragile than she would have liked. Theo stirred in her arms, still sleepy, and she automatically adjusted him, the maternal gesture bringing her back to reality. What are you doing here?" he asked, still processing the sight of her. "Traveling with my sons to see my grandmother." "You?" "Work." The answer was automatic, as always. Work. Always work. Sarah nodded as if she had expected that exact response. "Your sons?" Michael had noticed the plural, and now his eyes moved to the child she was holding. "Twins, Theo and Lucas." Sarah didn't elaborate. She didn't owe him any details, no explanations, not anymore. Michael looked at Theo, who was now awake and staring at him with curiosity. The child had dark, curly hair and big, expressive eyes. A beautiful kid. He looked familiar in a strange way. "How old are they?" 2.5. Sarah's answer was followed by a heavy silence. Michael did the math automatically. 2.5 meant she got pregnant about 6 months after they broke up. The thought bothered him more than he expected. The idea of Sarah with another man, building a family, moving on while he... "Well, I should get back to my seat," Sarah said, interrupting his thoughts. "The boys are alone." "Right, of course." Michael stepped aside to let her pass, but he couldn't help watching her as she walked away. The way she held the child, her careful posture, her simple but neat clothes. She was different, more of a woman, more mature, but also more tired. She carried a responsibility she didn't have at 22. Back in his seat, Michael tried to focus on the reports he had brought to read, but the words danced on the page without making sense. Sarah. After all these years, a mother of twins. The information replayed in his head like a persistent echo. He couldn't resist, getting up again, this time walking slowly down the aisle to try and see where she was sitting. He found her 5 rows behind him, in the middle of a scene that made him stop in his tracks. Sarah was sitting between the 2 boys, helping one of them, probably Lucas given his quieter demeanor, color a picture while the other, Theo, was trying to reach for something that had fallen on the floor. It was a simple domestic scene, but it radiated a tranquility Michael hadn't seen in years. That's when his eyes locked on Lucas. The boy had lifted his head to show his drawing to his mother, and Michael felt the floor drop out from under him. The child's face was a miniature version of his own. The same brown eyes, the same shape of the nose, even the way he slightly furrowed his brow when he concentrated. A tic Michael recognized because he'd done the same thing since he was a kid. Theo too. When he turned to pick up the fallen toy, Michael saw that they were nearly identical, and both of them carried features he knew intimately because he saw them in the mirror every day. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. 2.5 years old, 6 months after they broke up. The math didn't add up if she had met someone else after him. The math only added up if... Michael grabbed the side of a seat, feeling his legs go weak. Passengers started giving him strange looks, and he realized he'd been standing in the aisle for too long, with an expression that was probably worrying onlookers. He stumbled back to his seat, his mind spinning at top speed. It was impossible. Sarah would have told him. She should have. But even as he tried to deny it, the evidence piled up in his memory. The last time they were together had been in March. The boys were born when? September? October? The dates lined up perfectly. Michael spent the rest of the flight in a state of silent shock. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lucas's face, the way Theo gestured while explaining something to his mother, small mannerisms he recognized in himself. He tried to convince himself he was imagining things, seeing resemblances where there were none, but the more he tried to deny it, the more obvious it became. Sarah knew he was watching. She could feel his eyes on her back like a burn. She knew Michael well enough to know when he was processing information, and from the look on his face when he saw Lucas, she knew exactly what was going through his head. This wasn't how she had imagined he would find out. In fact, she had spent 2.5 years trying to convince herself he never would. When she found out she was pregnant, 3 weeks after their breakup, Michael had already moved to New York to expand his business. He was already living that new, ambitious life that didn't include her. Sarah remembered their last conversation perfectly. He had been clear. He needed to focus on his career. He wasn't ready for serious commitments. It was better if they went their separate ways. He hadn't mentioned kids, but the subtext was obvious. He didn't want anything tying him down. So, when she discovered she was expecting twins, Sarah made the hardest decision of her life, not to tell him. Not out of revenge, not out of hurt pride, but out of pure and simple self-preservation. She couldn't bear the thought of him feeling obligated to come back, or worse, rejecting the babies, as he had rejected their relationship. She raised the boys alone. She worked through her pregnancy until the last possible day. She went back to work when they were 3 months old. She built a life that worked, a routine that sustained her. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. She knew exactly where she stood, what to expect, and who she could trust. Now, seeing Michael's expression in the reflection of the plane window, Sarah felt all the certainties she had, so carefully built, threatening to crumble. Because she knew that look. It was the same look he had when he was solving complex problems, when he identified variables that completely changed the outcome of an equation. And this time, the variables were her sons. The plane began its descent, and Sarah focused on distracting the boys, explaining that they would soon be at their great-grandma's house, that she made the best key lime pie in the world, that they would get to run around in a big backyard full of fruit trees. Anything to maintain a sense of normalcy, to preserve the bubble of peace she had created for them. But she felt that something fundamental had shifted in those few minutes of their reunion. Michael wasn't the type of man to leave questions unanswered, and now he had the biggest question of all. When the plane touched down at Miami International Airport, Sarah knew that the quiet life she had built was about to be tested in a way she had never imagined. And for the first time in 2.5 years, she didn't know if she would be strong enough to protect her children and herself from the storm that was about to hit. Disembarking was a slow, tense process. Sarah managed to get off the plane before Michael, carrying Theo while Lucas held tightly to her free hand. The humid Miami heat enveloped them as soon as they stepped onto the jet bridge, a familiar and comforting sensation that usually calmed her. This time it only intensified her anxiety. She knew Michael would come after her. She knew that determination of his, the way he treated problems like puzzles that had to be solved. And now they were the biggest puzzle he had ever faced. "Mommy, why are you nervous?" Lucas asked, with that sharp perception children sometimes have. "I'm not nervous, sweetie. Just excited to see great-grandma." A lie. Sarah was absolutely nervous, and the feeling only worsened when she heard his voice behind her. "Sarah, wait." She stopped in the middle of the airport concourse, took a deep breath, and turned around. Michael was a few feet away, still wearing that expression of someone processing impossible information. He had taken off his tie and unbuttoned the top button of his shirt, something he always did when he was under pressure. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not here," Sarah replied, glancing at the boys. "They don't need to hear this." "Then where?" Sarah looked around. The airport was bustling, full of families reuniting for Christmas. It was no place for this conversation. She also didn't want to bring Michael to her grandmother's house, at least not without preparing her first. "There's a coffee shop over there," she said, pointing to a nearby cafe. "Let me call my grandma. Let her know we've arrived. Then we can talk." Michael nodded, but she could see that every second of waiting was torture for him. While Sarah stepped away to make the call, he watched the boys. Theo had found a small toy in his backpack and was trying to assemble it, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Lucas was sitting on the floor, arranging some small toy cars in a perfect line. The resemblance was unsettling. It wasn't just physical, it was behavioral. Theo had the same restless energy Michael had as a child, according to what his mother always said. Lucas had that need for organization, for putting things in order, that Michael recognized as a trait of his own. "Hi," said a small voice. Michael looked down and saw that Lucas had approached him, offering one of the toy cars. "For me?" Michael asked, crouching down to the child's level. Lucas nodded with the seriousness of a 2-year-old making an important offer. "Thank you," Michael said, accepting the car, a worn-out blue plastic Beetle. "It's very nice." "It's from my dad," Lucas said simply. The sentence hit Michael like a gunshot. "From your dad?" "Daddy left before we were born. But Mommy said he sent us the cars." Michael looked at Sarah, who had finished her call and was approaching quickly, having clearly overheard the last part of the conversation. "Lucas, come here, sweetie," she called, holding out her hand. "But I was talking to the man," Lucas protested. "I know, but we have to go now." Michael stood up slowly, still holding the toy car. "Sarah, please, let's talk now." She hesitated, looked at the boys, then at him. "Okay, but they stay with me." They went to the coffee shop in a tense silence. Sarah ordered 2 juices for the boys and set them up at a nearby table with a tablet full of cartoons, close enough to watch but far enough that they wouldn't overhear the conversation. Michael waited for her to sit down before getting straight to the point. "They're mine." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, delivered with the same certainty he used to close business deals. Sarah took a sip of the coffee she hadn't even ordered, buying time. "Michael, don't lie to me, Sarah. I saw it. They look just like I did when I was a kid. I have pictures to prove it." "So what?" Her question caught him off guard. "What do you mean, so what? They're my sons." "No," Sarah said calmly. "They're my sons. You just contributed the genetic material." Michael felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to keep his voice down. "You had no right to hide this from me." "Didn't I?" Sarah leaned forward. "Do you remember our last conversation, Michael? Do you remember telling me you needed to focus on your career, that you weren't ready for commitments, that it was better if we went our separate ways?" That was different. It was exactly that. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks later. 3 weeks you had already moved to New York. You were already setting up your new company. You had already made it crystal clear that I didn't fit into your life. What was I supposed to do? Call you crying, begging you to come back out of obligation? Michael opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. If she had told him then, would he have stayed? Or would he have offered money, a practical solution to an inconvenient problem? "I didn't know," he said finally, "because I didn't tell you, and I don't regret it." "How can you not regret it? I lost 2.5 years of their lives. And I lived 2.5 years of their lives alone, working 2 jobs to pay for daycare, spending sleepless nights with them when they had a fever, celebrating every tiny milestone with no one to share it with. You lost out? Yes, you did. But I lived through all of it." Michael fell silent, absorbing the weight of her words. He tried to imagine Sarah pregnant, alone, working, Sarah with 2 newborn babies without help, Sarah teaching them to walk, to talk, dealing with all the difficulties. He couldn't even fathom. "I would have helped," he said in a quieter voice. "Would you have?" Sarah smiled without joy. "How? By sending money from New York? Visiting on holidays when your schedule allowed? Do you think that's what I wanted for them? A father who pays child support but isn't present? You don't know how I would have reacted." "Yes, I do. I know you, Michael. Or at least I did. You would have done the right thing, because that's what you do. You would have taken financial responsibility, maybe even moved back to Miami if I insisted. But you would have hated every second of it. You would have felt trapped. You would have looked at them as obstacles to what you really wanted to do with your life." Michael wanted to protest, to say she was wrong, But something in the back of his mind stopped him. Was she wrong? At 26, obsessed with success, would he have been the father those children deserved? And now, he asked, now what? What happens now? I know they exist. Are you going to keep pretending I don't? Sarah looked at the boys who were engrossed in their cartoons, oblivious to the drama unfolding just a few feet away. I don't know, she admitted. I never thought this would happen. Sarah, I want to know them. For real. Not as the man they met at the airport, as their father. They don't know you're their father. Then tell them. It doesn't work like that. Sarah lowered her voice when she realized she had spoken too loudly. They're children, Michael. They have a routine, emotional security. I'm not going to drop a bomb on their lives just because you suddenly showed up. Michael took a deep breath, trying to control his frustration. In every business deal of his life, there was always a way to negotiate, to reach an agreement. Here, for the first time, he was dealing with something he couldn't control with corporate logic. Give me a chance, he said finally. Let me get to know them. As a new person in their lives, we can take it slow. Sarah studied him for a long moment. She saw something different in his expression. Not the businesslike determination from before, but something that seemed more genuine, more human. A chance for what exactly? You're going to spend 3 days here and then go back to New York. They'll get attached, they'll ask when you're coming back. Then what? Are you going to explain that you have important meetings? I can stay longer. Can you? I can cancel meetings. Sarah almost laughed. Michael Davis canceling meetings for something personal. If someone had told her that 6 years ago, she wouldn't have believed it. Sarah, his voice softened. I know I screwed everything up between us. I know I hurt you. And maybe you'll never forgive me for it, but they're not to blame for my bad choices, and I don't want them to grow up not knowing I exist. They know you exist. I never lied to them about that. What do you mean? They know their father left before they were born. They know you sent them the toy cars. Sarah pointed to the toy Michael was still holding. I bought them for their first birthday. I told them they were a gift from their dad. Michael looked at the toy car with new eyes. Why? Because I didn't want them to feel abandoned, and because, despite everything, I didn't want them to hate you. That confession disarmed Michael, completely. In all the anger and accusations of the last few minutes, he hadn't expected this generosity. Thank you, he said simply. Sarah nodded and checked her watch. My grandma's waiting. If you really want to get to know them, you can come with us. But there are rules. What rules? First, you're a friend of Mommy's. That's it for now. Second, if you decide this is too complicated and you want to leave, you leave before they get attached. Third, no expensive gifts or promises you can't keep. They're normal kids who live a normal life. Michael nodded quickly. Deal. Sarah stood up and went to the boys. Guys, let's go. Great-grandma is waiting. Is the man coming with us? Asked Theo, who had apparently paid more attention to the conversation than she thought. Sarah looked at Michael. Do you want to come with us? I do. Okay then. Mr. Michael is coming with us to visit Great-Grandma. In the taxi to Grandma Eleanor's house, Michael sat in the front while Sarah sat in the back with the boys. During the half-hour drive through Miami traffic, he listened to their chatter, their questions about everything they saw out the window, the way Sarah answered every why and what's that, with infinite patience. It was a completely new world for him. A world where conversations were interrupted by requests to go to the bathroom, where snacks had to be divided equally to avoid fights, where just 5 more minutes was a legitimate negotiation. When they arrived at the grandmother's house, a simple 2-story home in a quiet Miami neighborhood with a garden out front and a blue-painted fence, Michael felt the contrast between their two worlds become even more stark. There was no doorman, no security, no sign of the luxuries he was used to, but it had something his Tribeca apartment never had, the immediate feeling of home. Grandma Eleanor was at the door before they even got out of the taxi, a woman in her 70s with white hair in a bun, a wide smile and open arms. The boys ran to her before Sarah could even get the luggage. My grandbabies, you've gotten so big, she exclaimed, kissing them both and making them laugh with tickles. "Grandma, this is Mr. Michael," Lucas introduced formally. "He was on the plane with us." Grandma Eleanor looked up at Michael and he immediately saw where Sarah had gotten her piercing gaze. The woman sized him up in 2 seconds, and he got the distinct impression he had been scanned and catalogued with surgical precision. "Mr. Michael," she repeated. "A pleasure. I'm Eleanor, Sarah's grandmother. Come in, the sun is strong." Inside, Michael was enveloped by the smell of home cooking and the buzz of a house that was truly lived in. There were toys scattered on the floor, family photos on the walls, that organized chaos of a place where people actually dwelled. "Mr. Michael, come see my room." Theo pulled him by the hand. The room was small with a simple bunk bed and walls covered in drawings. Michael recognized some cartoon characters, but what caught his attention were the drawings made by the children themselves, colorful scribbles taped to the wall, some clearly depicting a family. One large female figure and 2 smaller ones. "Where do you sleep in New York?" Lucas asked. "In an apartment. Do you have a bunk bed?" "No, I have a big bed." "By yourself?" The innocent question made him pause. "By myself." "That must be sad," Lucas concluded with the brutal simplicity of children. Michael didn't know what to say. He had never thought of it that way. To him, living alone had always been synonymous with freedom, control, the power to do things his way. He had never considered the possibility of it being sad. During dinner, a simple meal of grilled fish with black beans and rice that was infinitely better than any expensive restaurant he frequented, Michael observed the family dynamic. The way Grandma Eleanor told stories that made the boys laugh, how Sarah automatically cut their food into small pieces, how Lucas always offered a bit of his food to the person next to him. It was harmonious, functional in a way he wasn't used to. "And you, Michael, what do you do for a living?" Grandma Eleanor asked. "I have a consulting firm." "Ah, and do you like it?" The question caught him off guard. Did he like it? "It's rewarding." "Rewarding," she repeated, in a tone that suggested she knew the exact difference between liking something and finding it rewarding. "And family. Do you have children?" Sarah nearly choked on her water. Michael looked at her, then at the boys. "No," he said, "I don't have any children." But, as he spoke, he looked at Lucas and Theo, who were competing to see who could build the tallest tower with their French fries, and for the first time in his life, Michael Davis felt like he had just told a lie. Michael woke up in the modest motel where he'd managed to get a last-minute room, his back aching from the hard mattress and his mind spinning. It was 6 in the morning on Christmas Eve, and he was already dressed and drinking the watery coffee the motel offered. He hadn't been able to sleep well, his head filled with images of the boys, Sarah's expression, and the strange feeling of being in a house that truly felt like a home. He had promised to come back in the morning to help with the Christmas preparations, without knowing exactly what that meant. In his life, Christmas was a holiday he spent working or traveling for work. He had never participated in family preparations. When he arrived at Grandma Eleanor's house at 8 o'clock, he found a scene of organized activity. Sarah was in the kitchen baking a cake, an apron tied around her waist and flour on her face. The boys were running around the backyard, chasing an orange cat that seemed used to the attention. Grandma Eleanor was watering the plants on the patio. "Mr. Michael," Theo was the first to see him. "You came. Come see, Garfield pooped in our dollhouse." Michael laughed, surprised by his own reaction. In New York, a cat problem would be solved with a call to the building manager. Here, it became a source of laughter and conversation. "Good morning," Sarah said, appearing at the kitchen door, wiping her hands on a towel. "Did you sleep well?" "Not really." He didn't lie. "And you?" "Lucas had a nightmare last night. He said he dreamed that Mr. Michael left without saying goodbye." The information hit him like a punch to the gut. A child who barely knew him had a nightmare about him leaving. Michael didn't know how to process that. "Is he okay?" "He is, but he kept asking if you were coming back today." "And I did." "Yeah." Sarah watched him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "You really did." Grandma Eleanor approached, carrying an empty watering can. "Michael, do you know how to peel potatoes?" "No." "Then you're going." "To learn. Sarah, teach this boy how to help in the kitchen. For the entire morning, Michael discovered a whole new world. He learned that peeling potatoes was harder than it looked, that 2.5-year-olds had strong opinions on how to decorate cookies, and that making a home-cooked meal for 6 people took hours of preparation. "Have you really never done this before?" Sarah asked, watching him struggle with a vegetable peeler. "Never had to. I've always lived alone. I work a lot. I order food or eat out." "And when you were a kid, didn't your mom teach you?" Michael stopped peeling. "My mom always had a housekeeper, and after my parents' divorce, I spent more time at boarding school than at home." Sarah looked at him with curiosity. "Boarding school?" "Since I was 10. My parents thought it would be better for my education." "And you, did you think it was better?" The question made him stop completely. No one had ever asked him that. "I never thought about it. It was just the way things were." Sarah nodded, but he saw something like pity in her eyes. That must have been tough. It wasn't tough, it was efficient. "Mr. Michael, come here," Lucas called him from the living room. "I want to show you something." Michael left the half-peeled potato on the counter and went to the living room, where Lucas had spread all his toy cars on the floor and was arranging them in perfect lines. "Look, I organized them just like you do." "How do you know I organize things like that?" "You organized the toothpicks at dinner last night. Mommy always says organized people are smart people." Michael crouched down next to Lucas, impressed by the child's observation. "You're very organized too." "Yeah, Mommy says I take after my dad." Lucas paused and looked at Michael with those big, serious eyes. "Did you know my daddy?" The question caught Michael completely off guard. He looked at Sarah, who had approached and was listening to the conversation with a tense expression. "Why do you ask?" "Because everyone has a dad. At school, the kids talk about their dads. Me and Theo have never seen our dad." "And what does your mum tell you about him?" "That he left before we were born, but he sent us the cars. And that he's smart like me." Lucas paused. "Are you smart like me?" Michael felt his heart ache. "I think so." "Then can you be my daddy?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had stopped breathing. Michael looked at her, then at Lucas, who was waiting for an answer with the infinite patience of a child who has asked a perfectly logical question. "Lucas," Sarah approached and knelt beside them. "Remember what Mommy explained? Your daddy can't come back right now, but he loves you very much. But can Mr. Michael be our daddy for a little while, just a little while?" Michael felt something break inside, his chest, the need in Lucas's voice, the way he talked about having a dad as if it was something borrowed, temporary. "I can be your friend," Michael said carefully. "A very special friend." "A special friend like a daddy?" "Lucas, come help Grandma season the chicken," Grandma Eleanor called from the kitchen, clearly having overheard the conversation and deciding to intervene. When Lucas ran off, Michael remained crouched on the living room floor, looking at the toy cars arranged in perfect lines. Sarah sat on the couch behind him. "He asks that question to every man who shows him kindness," she said softly. "To the doctor who was nice at his checkup, to the swimming instructor, to the neighbor who fixes his bike." That doesn't make me feel any better. It wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to make you understand that they miss having a father figure. They always have. Michael turned to look at her. "Have you ever thought about dating someone? So they could have a pretend dad?" Sarah shook her head. "Many times. But every time I met someone interesting, I'd think, what if he doesn't like the boys? What if they get attached and he decides to leave? What if it's just tolerance, not real love?" "And now, what do you think now?" Sarah took a long time to answer. "Now I think it's even more complicated. Because you're not a stranger trying to enter our lives. You're their father. It's different." "Is it?" "It is. If you were a boyfriend who decided to leave, it would be sad. But if you leave as their father, it will be devastating." Michael absorbed the weight of that responsibility. It wasn't just about him wanting to know his sons. It was about 2 children who were already showing a need for a father and who could be destroyed by another rejection. "I'm not leaving," he said. "You don't know that. You don't even know what your life looks like with them in it." During the afternoon, Michael began to find out. He learned that 2.5-year-olds ask questions about absolutely everything. that they have endless energy and limited attention spans, that they cry for reasons that make perfect sense to them, even if they seem silly to adults. When Theo fell and scraped his knee, Michael felt his own heart race as if he had been the one who got hurt. When Lucas managed to tie his own shoe for the first time, Michael felt a pride he had never experienced, not even with his greatest professional achievements. "You're doing well," Sarah commented, as they watched the boys play in the backyard. "I have no idea what I'm doing. Nobody does. Motherhood and fatherhood don't come with an instruction manual. You seem to know. It seems that way because I've had a lot of practice, but in the first few months, I cried every night out of desperation. I thought I couldn't do it. But you did." "I did, but not alone. Grandma helped me a lot." Michael looked at Grandma Eleanor, who was sitting on the porch, sewing something that looked like a small piece of clothing. All day, she had offered practical advice, resolved conflicts between the children, and kept everything running with an efficiency he admired. "Can I ask you something?" Michael said. "Why is she being so kind to me? From what Sarah said, I don't deserve it." "Grandma is wise. She sees potential where other people only see problems. And you, what do you see in me?" Sarah studied him for a long moment. "Confusion, regret, and maybe hope." "Hope? You cancelled meetings to be here. You're peeling potatoes and playing with toy cars on the floor. You asked how to get Garfield's poop out of the dollhouse without ruining her hair." Sarah smiled for the first time since their reunion. "That's not the Michael I knew. Maybe I've changed. Maybe. Or maybe you always had this version of you inside and never had the chance to let it out." At the end of the afternoon, when the boys finally succumbed to exhaustion and fell asleep on the living room couch, Michael found himself sitting on the porch with Grandma Eleanor, drinking strong coffee and watching the street. "You're scared," she said, without beating around the bush. "Am I?" "You are. Scared you're not good enough for them. Scared you don't know how to be a father. Scared you'll mess everything up." Michael nodded slowly. "What if I don't know how? What if I'm terrible at this?" Every father and mother has that fear. The difference is that some admit it and try to learn, while others pretend they know everything and mess up their kids. Sarah is an amazing mother. She is. But she wasn't born knowing how. She learned by making mistakes, by crying, by trying again. Grandma Eleanor looked at him directly. "You have a choice, Michael. You can stay scared and leave, or you can stay and learn alongside them." "And what if Sarah doesn't give me that chance?" "Sarah already gave you the chance. You're here, aren't you?" Michael looked inside the house where Sarah was covering the boys with a light blanket. She did it with an automatic, natural affection, like someone who had made the same gesture thousands of times. "Grandma Eleanor, can I ask you something? Do you think I deserve forgiveness?" "Forgiveness isn't something you deserve. Forgiveness is something you ask for, receive, and honor. The question isn't whether you deserve it. The question is whether you're willing to earn it." "How?" "By staying, not out of guilt, not out of obligation. Staying because they deserve a present father. Staying because Sarah deserves a real partner. Staying because you deserve to be more than a rich, lonely man." That night, when Michael returned to the motel, he called his assistant in New York and cancelled all his meetings for the next week. Then, for the first time in years, he turned off his phone and fell asleep, thinking not of spreadsheets or business strategies, but of the sound of Lucas's laughter when he hit an improvised target with a ball, and the way Theo had fallen asleep holding his hand. At Grandma Eleanor's house, Sarah tucked the boys into bed and watched them sleep. Lucas whispered in his sleep, "Is Mr. Michael coming back tomorrow?" And she realized, with a mix of hope and terror, that she wanted to know the answer to that question too. The next morning, Christmas Day, Michael arrived earlier than he had promised. He was carrying a brown paper bag and riding an old bicycle he had rented from a gas station. "Where did you get that bike?" Sarah asked, laughing. "I thought it would be fun to ride around the neighborhood with the boys, if you'll let me. They don't know how to ride bikes yet. Then I'll teach them." Sarah watched him take simple craft supplies out of the bag, not expensive toys or designer clothes, but paper, paint, brushes, and glue. "I thought we could do something together," he explained. "Grandma Eleanor said they like to paint." "Michael, I know I'm not the father they deserve yet. I know I might never be, but I want to try. For real this time. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, because they are incredible. And because I want to be a part of their lives." Sarah felt something stir in her chest, a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. Hope, maybe, or the distant memory of what she once felt for this man. "Okay," she said, "but remember the rules." "I remember. No promises I can't keep. And Michael? Yes? Thank you. For coming back. For trying." When the boys woke up and saw Michael at the kitchen table, preparing paints and paper, they ran to him with a joy that made Sarah's heart both ache and open up at the same time. Because for the first time in 2.5 years, she wasn't alone in figuring everything out. And for the first time since they met, Michael Davis seemed to be exactly where he wanted to be. Michael's phone rang for the first time in 3 days on the morning of December 26th. He was in Grandma Eleanor's backyard teaching Lucas how to use a paintbrush on a makeshift dollhouse made from a cardboard box when the shrill sound cut through the morning's tranquility. "You can get that," Sarah said, noticing his hesitation. "It might be important." Michael looked at Lucas, who was waiting patiently to continue painting, then at his phone. The name Jessica flashed on the screen. His fiancée. Ex-fiancée? The situation was too complicated to define. "Hello? Michael? My God, finally! I've been trying to call you for 3 days. Your assistant said you cancelled all your meetings for the week. What's going on?" Jessica Miller's voice was an equal mix of irritation and concern. A successful model and entrepreneur from a traditional New York family, she represented everything society expected in a perfect wife for a man like Michael. Beautiful, smart, from a good family, and with her own career. "Jessica, a family situation came up." "A family situation? What situation? You don't even have any close family besides your parents." Michael walked a few feet away, lowering his voice. "It's complicated. I'm dealing with some things here in Miami." "Miami? Michael, are you okay? This is so unlike you. We had dinner reservations last night with the Clarks to discuss the details of our partnership in their company. They were furious when you didn't show up." He had completely forgotten about the dinner. For 3 whole days, he hadn't thought once about business, partnerships, or social engagements. The only thing that had occupied his mind were the daily discoveries about his sons, that Theo liked long hugs before bed, that Lucas organized his toys before putting them away, that they both had the same crooked smile when they were up to something. "Jessica, we need to talk when I get back." "Talk about what?" "Michael, you're scaring me. What is this about a family situation?" "I have children." The silence on the other end of the line was long and cold. "What do you mean you have children?" 2 boys, twins, 2.5 years old." "Michael, this is a very tasteless joke." "It's not a joke. I found out 3 days ago. Their mother is someone I knew before. She never told me about the pregnancy." "And you're sure they're yours?" The question deeply irritated him. "I'm sure." "Michael, even if they are your children, that doesn't change anything between us. You can pay child support, have a visitation agreement." "Jessica, it doesn't work like that." "Why not? You barely know these kids. You can't just throw our life away over a situation that came out of nowhere." Michael looked at the backyard, where Sarah was helping Theo pick colors to paint a tree. Lucas had stopped painting and was clearly trying to listen to the phone conversation. "Our life?" "Yes, our life. The wedding plans, the partnership with the Clarks, the apartment we're decorating together. You can't just throw all of that away." "And what if I want to be a part of their lives for real?" "Then you can be, but here in New York. Bring them for weekends, for holidays. You don't have to live in Florida to be a father." The way she said Florida, with a slightly dismissive tone, made something click in Michael's head. That was exactly how he used to think. as if real life only existed in New York, as if the rest of the country was just a temporary concession. Jessica, I need some time to think. Time to think? Michael? We've been together for 2 years. We've been engaged for 6 months. You can't just ask for a break because of a situation you didn't even know existed until last week. Maybe that's exactly why I need to think. Because until last week, I didn't know I had sons. And now that I do, everything has changed. Nothing has changed. You're still you, and they're still their mother's responsibility. They're not just her responsibility. They're my sons. Michael. Jessica's voice became more controlled, more strategic. You're going through a difficult emotional time. It's normal. Any man would be shaken to find out he has children, but you don't make important decisions when you're emotionally compromised. Come, back to New York. We'll talk calmly. We'll organize everything properly. And what if I don't want to organize? What if I want to mess everything up? You don't want to mess anything up. You're Michael Davis. You don't mess up. You organize, you plan, you control. Michael hung up the phone with the feeling that he had just heard a description of someone he no longer recognized. It was true that he had always been organized, controlled, and planned, but for the last 3 days he had been someone else. Someone who painted dollhouses, who helped make popcorn on the stove, who laughed when Theo got paint on his own face. "Mr. Michael," Lucas approached. "Why are you sad?" "I'm not sad." "Yes, you are. Your face looks the same as when Theo breaks something." Michael crouched down to Lucas's level. "It's just that sometimes adults have complicated problems to solve." "What kind of problems?" "Problems about where to live, who to be with, what choices to make." Lucas thought for a moment, with the seriousness only children can muster when they're truly concentrating. "Mommy always says we have to choose what makes our heart happy. And what if we don't know what makes our heart happy? Then we try things until we find out." The simplicity of Lucas's answer was like a punch to the gut. Michael thought about the life he had built in New York, the luxurious apartment that always felt empty, the social dinners where he pretended to have fun, the success that had cost him so much he sometimes forgot why he had started chasing it. "Lucas, do you like it when I come here to play with you?" "I like it a lot. You make funny voices when you tell stories." "And what if I came more often? Every day?" "Maybe." Lucas smiled with that crooked grin that could melt any defense. "Then it would be cool, like having a daddy." Michael felt his heart tighten. "You wish you had a daddy?" "I do, but not just any daddy. I want a daddy who likes to play and isn't on the phone all the time." The indirect criticism hit Michael hard. Over the last 3 days, he had turned off his phone more times than in the last 3 years. "Mr. Michael," Theo appeared, with blue paint up to his elbow. "Mommy said to come for lunch." During lunch, Michael was distracted, Sarah noticed. "Trouble at work?" "Something like that." "Are you going to have to go back to New York?" The question was asked in a casual tone, but Michael sensed the tension behind it. In the last few days, they had developed a comfortable routine. He would arrive in the morning, spend the day helping with the kids, have dinner with them, and go back to his motel at night. They weren't romantically reconciled, but they were partners, a team. "I don't know. Maybe. I understand." But he could see that she didn't. He saw the way she subtly closed herself off, how she raised the barriers she had learned to build to protect herself. In the afternoon, while the boys were napping, Michael talked with Grandma Eleanor on the porch. "You have a decision to make," she said directly. "I do." "And what is it?" "I don't know. I have a whole life built in New York. Business, commitments, a fiancé." "A fiancé?" Grandma Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "It's complicated." "It doesn't seem complicated to me. Either you love her or you don't." Michael fell silent. Love. When was the last time he had thought about love in relation to Jessica? Their relationship had been built on practical foundations, social compatibility, similar goals, mutual convenience. Love had become a secondary detail. "Grandma Eleanor, can I ask you something? How did you know you loved your husband?" She smiled, a smile that carried decades of memories. "Because when I was with him, I was the best version of myself, and when I wasn't, I felt like a piece of me was missing. And what if the person doesn't make you the best version of yourself? Then it's not love, it's convenience. That night, Michael barely slept. He stared at the motel ceiling, thinking about Grandma Eleanor's definition. With Jessica, he was the version that was expected of him, a successful businessman, a suitable fiancé, a man who made rational decisions. With Sarah and the boys, he was discovering versions of himself he didn't even know existed. The next morning, when he arrived at Grandma Eleanor's house, he found a strange commotion. Sarah was on the phone, speaking quietly, but clearly stressed. "What happened?" he asked Grandma Eleanor. "Sarah had to switch her shift today. An emergency at the hospital. She'll have to work late." "And the boys? They'll stay with me, but I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon. I can stay with them," Michael offered immediately. "Alone?" Sarah had hung up the phone and approached. "Why not?" "Michael, taking care of 2-year-old twins by yourself is no joke. It's real responsibility." "I know. Do you really? Do you know that if they get hurt, it's your fault? Do you know you'll have to give them a bath, change their clothes, make them eat without making a monumental mess? Do you know they'll test every one of your limits to see how far they can push? You?" "Sarah, I want to try." She studied him for a long moment. "Okay, but any problem, any question, you call me." That's when Michael's phone rang again. "Jessica." "Are you going to answer that?" Sarah asked. Michael looked at the phone, then at Lucas and Theo, who were eating breakfast and arguing about which cartoon to watch next. He declined the call without answering. "Michael, I want to stay with them today. I want to learn what it's like to be a real father." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then you're about to find out." The next 6 hours were the most intense of Michael's life. He discovered that 2-year-olds were like tiny hurricanes, capable of turning an organized house into a war zone in minutes. He discovered that they constantly tested boundaries, that they cried for reasons that made sense only to them, that they had endless energy punctuated by sudden meltdowns. He also discovered that when Lucas managed to tie his own shoe and ran to show him, the pride he felt was greater than any professional achievement. That when Theo was scared of thunder and ran into his arms, the sense of protectiveness he felt was visceral, instinctive. When Sarah arrived that night and found the house reasonably tidy, the boys clean and fed, and Michael passed out on the couch with Theo asleep on top of him, and Lucas curled up by his side, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope that maybe this time he would actually stay. But the next day, Jessica arrived in Miami. Jessica Miller arrived in Miami like an elegant hurricane, dressed in a white linen suit that wouldn't wrinkle even in the Florida heat, high heels that clicked on the airport floor, and a determination Michael knew well, the same one she used to close million-dollar deals. She didn't say she was coming. She simply showed up at the motel where Michael was staying at 10 in the morning on a Thursday after finding out his location through a strategic call to his assistant. "You weren't answering my calls," she said, entering the modest room as if she were inspecting a property for a potential purchase. Michael was getting dressed to go to Grandma Eleanor's house. He had promised the boys he would teach them to play soccer in the backyard. The polo shirt he was wearing was one Sarah had lent him from her brother, because all of Michael's clothes were at the laundromat after a few accidents involving paint, food, and dirt. "Jessica, I wasn't expecting you." "Obviously. Otherwise you would have disappeared somewhere else." She glanced around the small room with its simple furniture and noisy air conditioner. "My God, Michael. You're staying here? It's comfortable." "Comfortable?" Jessica sat on the edge of the bed as if testing its safety. "Michael, this isn't you. You're the man who complains when the thread count of the hotel sheets is less than 400. She wasn't wrong. 6 months ago, Michael would have found this motel unacceptable. Now, after spending his nights thinking about Lucas's smile and Theo's hugs, he hadn't even noticed the discomfort. Things have changed, Jessica. Nothing has changed. She stood up and began pacing the small room. You found out you have kids and you're spiraling. It's understandable. Any man would be shaken, but you can't throw your entire life in the trash over an unplanned situation. What if I want to? You don't. You're confused, emotional, but this isn't you. How do you know who I am? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean, how do I know? We've been together for 2 years. And what version of me do you know? The real version. The successful businessman. The man who built an empire from scratch, who makes rational decisions, who doesn't get carried away by sentimentality. Michael finished dressing and looked at her in the mirror. And what if that's not the real version? What if it's just the version I built because I thought that's who I was supposed to be? Michael, you're talking crazy. Let's go back to New York. Talk calmly. I'm not going back. At least not right now. Because of 2 children you've known for a week. Because of my sons. Your sons? Jessica laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. Michael, you know nothing about children. You don't even like children. Remember your cousin's wedding, when you complained that the kids were making too much noise, Michael remembered. He remembered finding the children annoying, unruly. Now he realized that what really bothered him back then was his own inability to understand their world, their spontaneity. People change, Jessica. They don't change that much in a week. Maybe they just discover who they've always been underneath all the layers they built to survive. Jessica stopped pacing and looked at him with an expression he had never seen before. Vulnerability, perhaps, or fear. And me? What happens to me in this existential discovery of yours? Michael turned to face her fully. Jessica, do you love me? Of course I love you. Why? The question caught her off guard again. What do you mean? Why? Why do you love me? What specifically do you love about me? Jessica opened and closed her mouth a few times. You're successful, smart, ambitious. We're a good match. We want the same things in life. Those are qualities you admire, not reasons to love someone. Don't be ridiculous. Adult love is based on compatibility, not teenage sentimentality. Is it? Michael thought of Sarah, of what he felt when she laughed at something silly he said, the way his heart raced when she looked at him with approval after he managed to do something right with the kids, the feeling of completeness he felt when they were all together at Grandma Eleanor's dinner table. Was that teenage sentimentality, or was it what love really meant? Michael, I came all the way here to get you. I cancelled important meetings. I came to this place, Kat, because you're important to me. Or because I'm important to your plans. The accusation hung in the air between them like an invisible wall. Jessica sat on the bed again, this time looking smaller, more fragile. That's not fair, isn't it? Jessica, when was the last time we talked about something that wasn't work, business, or our plans for the future? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling about something? We're not sentimental people. I wasn't a sentimental person, but maybe I should have been. Michael picked up the keys to the borrowed bicycle. I have to go. I promised the boys I'd teach them how to play soccer. Soccer? Michael, you hate soccer. I used to. Now I'm learning to like it. It's not going to work, Jessica said as he stood at the door. This fantasy of a happy family, this simple life you're romanticizing, you'll get tired of it. You'll miss your real life. Michael paused at the door. Maybe. But I'd rather try and find out than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. When Michael arrived at Grandma Eleanor's house, he found Sarah sitting on the porch with a worried expression. A woman came by asking for you, she said without preamble. Jessica is here. I figured. She's beautiful. She is. And elegant. She is. Sarah studied him. Is she your fiancée? Michael hesitated. She was. She is. I don't know. That's an interesting answer. Sarah, Mr. Michael. Theo came running out, holding a small soccer ball. Did you bring the net you promised? I did. Michael showed him a small collapsible goal he had bought at a sporting goods store. Let's set. Hit up. For the next hour, Michael focused on teaching the boys the basics of soccer. Lucas was methodical, trying to understand the rules before playing. Theo was pure instinct, kicking the ball with all his might and running after it, shouting with joy. Sarah watched them from the porch, smiling whenever Michael celebrated a tiny goal as if it were a World Cup victory. It was impossible not to notice how much he had changed. The Michael she knew at 22 would never have had the patience to explain for the 5th time why you couldn't use your hands. In soccer. That's when Jessica appeared. She had changed from the linen suit into a simpler dress, but she still looked visibly out of place. She stopped at the gate of the house, as if deciding whether to come in. Michael! He stopped chasing the ball and looked at her. The boys stopped too, sensing the tension in the air with their sharp, childish perception. "Who is she?" Lucas asked. "She's a friend of Mr. Michael's," Sarah answered, before Michael could speak. Jessica approached slowly. "You must be Sarah." "I am." "And you're Jessica." "I am." Jessica looked at the boys who were watching her with curiosity. "Are these them?" "They're my sons, Lucas and Theo." Jessica crouched down to their level but kept a respectful distance. "Hi, you're handsome, just like your daddy." The phrase made Sarah gasp. Lucas tilted his head curiously. "You know our daddy?" Jessica looked at Michael, then at Sarah, clearly realizing she had stepped on an emotional landmine. I've known Mr. Michael for a long time." "Mr. Michael isn't our daddy," Theo said with the brutal honesty of children. "Our daddy left before we were born, but Mommy said he sent us the cars." Jessica stood up slowly, processing the information. "Michael, you didn't tell them." "Jessica, they don't know you're their father?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas looked at Michael, then at Sarah, then back at Michael. "Is Mr. Michael our daddy?" Sarah closed her eyes. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. An abrupt revelation, without preparation, in the middle of a tense moment. Michael crouched down to Lucas's level. "It's complicated, Lucas." "Complicated how?" Yes, I'm your and Theo's daddy. But I only found that out a few days ago. And I didn't want to tell you until I was sure I could stay." "And can you?" Theo asked with the pure hope only children can show. Michael looked at Jessica, who was clearly waiting for an answer too. Then he looked at Sarah, who had stood up and was standing with her arms crossed in a defensive posture. "I can." "Forever?" Lucas's question echoed in the backyard like a challenge. Michael thought about the life he had built in New York, the commitments he had made, the expectations he had for himself. Then he thought about waking up every day knowing he would see those smiles, teach those boys about the world and grow with them. "Forever," he said, and for the first time in his adult life, he made a promise he knew he could keep. "Michael," Jessica approached, "can we talk in private?" They moved to the back of the yard, while Sarah distracted the boys with the promise of a special snack. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica asked. "You really want to give up everything we've built together for this life?" Michael looked at the simple house, at Sarah in the kitchen with the boys, at Grandma Eleanor watering, her plants as if nothing extraordinary were happening. "Jessica, do you remember when we first met? You said I was different from other men you knew because I knew exactly what I wanted." "I remember. The problem is, I was wrong about what I wanted. I thought I wanted success, recognition, a life that would impress other people, but what I really wanted was a family, to belong somewhere, to have people who cared about me, not for what I did, but for who I was." "And you don't think you can have that with me?" Michael looked at her, with genuine affection. "Jessica, you're an incredible woman. You'll make some man very happy, but it's not me, and you know that too." "I don't." "Yes, you do. When you describe me, you talk about my professional qualities, about how I fit into your plans. You never talk about how I make you laugh or how you feel when you're with me, or about dreams we have together that don't involve money or status." Jessica was silent for a long moment. "What if I said I could change, that I could learn to be more sentimental? Then I would say, you deserve someone who loves you exactly as you are, and that I deserve someone I love exactly as she is." Jessica nodded slowly. "It's Sarah. It's Sarah. It was always Sarah. I was just too stupid to realize it 6 years ago. And now? Now I'm going to try not to be stupid again." Jessica looked toward the house where they could see Sarah helping the boys make sandwiches, laughing at something Theo had said. "She loves you," she said simply. "How do you know?" From the way she looks at you when you're not watching. She tries to hide it, but it's obvious. And you? Will you be okay? Jessica smiled, and for the first time since she arrived, she seemed genuinely relaxed. I'll be fine. In fact, I think I'll be better than fine. Maybe it's time for me to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect girlfriend. They walked back to where Sarah was with the children. Jessica said her goodbyes politely, without drama. She kissed Michael's cheek, told him to be happy, and left with the same elegance she had arrived with. When Jessica's taxi disappeared around the corner, Sarah approached Michael. So that's it, you're staying? I'm staying if you'll have me. Michael, I need to know you're sure, because if you change your mind in 6 months or a year, it will destroy them, and I won't be able to pick up the pieces alone again. Michael took her hands in his. Sarah, I spent the last 6 years building a life that looked perfect on paper, but was empty in reality. Here, in these last few days, I've discovered what it means to have a real life. It's not perfect, it's messy, unpredictable, sometimes chaotic, but it's real. And your company? Your business in New York? I can manage it from anywhere. And if I can't, I'll find another kind of work. There are more important things than money. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Who are you, and what have you done with Michael Davis? Michael Davis grew up, he said, smiling. Finally. 3 months later, Michael had sold his share of the company to his partner, moved his assets into investments he could manage remotely, and bought a house in the same neighborhood as Grandma Eleanor. It wasn't a mansion. It was a simple 3-bedroom house with a big backyard and a porch where he could sit every afternoon and watch the boys play. He and Sarah weren't rushing things. They were rebuilding their relationship slowly, day by day, figuring out how they worked as a family. Some nights, he would have dinner with them and leave afterward. Others, he would sleep on the living room couch when the boys begged him to stay. On one of those nights, after the children were asleep, they were sitting on the porch of the new house, sharing a beer and watching the street. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked. "About what?" "About everything you gave up." Michael thought about the question, looking at the toys scattered across the yard, listening to the distant hum of the air conditioner in the boys' room. "You know the difference between my life before and now?" "What?" "Before, I woke up every day afraid of losing what I had built. Now I wake up every day excited to build more." Sarah smiled. "That's a very beautiful way of saying you don't have any regrets. It's an honest way of saying I finally understand the difference between having a life and living one." That night, for the first time since they had reconnected, Michael slept at the house. Not on the living room couch, but in Sarah's room, with her curled up in his arms and the sound of their son's peaceful breathing in the room next door. 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in Grandma Eleanor's backyard, with Lucas as the ring bearer and Theo as the flower boy, a role he took very seriously, Michael and Sarah got married. It wasn't a grand ceremony. It was a genuine celebration with the people who truly mattered. During the exchange of vows, Michael looked at Sarah and said, "I promise to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. I promise that when our children ask where Daddy is, the answer will always be, right here. And I promise that when you need a partner, a companion, someone to share not just the joys but also the worries and responsibilities, I will be here." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, replied, "And I promise to keep teaching you that love isn't a conquest, but a daily construction. That family isn't perfection, but presence, and that you are already the man you always had the potential to be. You just needed a reason to let him out." 2 years later, when Lucas and Theo were about to turn 5 and were calling Michael Dad, as if it had always been natural, Sarah found out she was pregnant again. "How do you think they'll react?" she asked, showing the test to Michael. "They'll probably want to know if the baby will like soccer," Michael replied, kissing her still flat stomach. "And you? How are you feeling?" Michael thought about the question. 5 years ago, the news of a pregnancy would have terrified him. Now the idea of another child only completed a picture that was already perfect. "Excited," he said honestly. "Excited to meet another incredible person who will change my life in ways I can't even imagine yet." "You really have changed," Sarah said, smiling. I haven't changed. I just stopped fighting who I always was underneath all the layers of ambition and fear. On the porch of their house, watching Lucas teach Theo how to organize the toy cars by color and size, a clearly paternal inheritance, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had lost a company, a luxurious lifestyle, a socially appropriate fiancée, and a life that impressed strangers. In return, he had gained 2 sons who loved him unconditionally, a wife who knew him better than he knew himself, a family that accepted him with all his flaws and strengths, and a life that made sense every single day. It wasn't the life he had planned. It was infinitely better. And when Lucas ran to him that afternoon, holding a drawing he had made at school, a stick-figure family with "My Family" written in crooked letters, Michael understood that success wasn't measured in bank figures or professional recognition. It was measured in moments like that, in belonging, in being loved not for what he did but for who he was, in waking up every day knowing he had a place in the world, people who depended on him and whom he loved more than life itself. This was it. Finally, this was it.